Hi there, everybody. Thank you so much for signing on to this virtual presentation about vaping. We're going to talk about the new look of nicotine addiction and how to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping. My name is Ashley Hall. I'm the program manager of the Northeast Tobacco-Free Community Partnership. I'm funded by the Massachusetts Tobacco Cessation and Prevention Program, which is a program of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, but I am based out of Greater Lawrence Family Health Center. I serve all of Northeast Massachusetts, so it's this top right-hand corner of the state. It's 49 cities and towns, mainly Middlesex and Essex County. Again, I get my funding from public health agencies, and I work to give free tobacco prevention, education, assistance, resources to that entire region. We're going to start off today talking about a little bit of data. So looking at this graph going back to 1995 and up until 2019 last year, you can see that we did a really great job at teaching kids that tobacco is bad for us. We saw this really steady decline in use of cigarettes, cigars, or even smokeless tobacco, very much declining. Something's missing from this graph, and of course that's vaping products. So unfortunately, around 2015, vaping products started to come onto the market, and we saw high school students just really get onto the addiction of vaping. It started kind of low, but then in 2019, we saw it skyrocket. Up to 32% of high school students reported that they are currently using vaping products. That is measured by saying that they have vaped regularly in the past 30 days. So that's 32% of high school students. As far as more high school data in the state of Massachusetts, we also have data on the amount of students that said they had ever even tried e-cigarettes. So that's whether they've tried it once and never picked it up again, or they do it 10 times a day. So over half of all high school students in Massachusetts reported they had ever tried vaping products. And we still see even them using some other tobacco, but again, we taught kids that cigarettes were bad for us, so they stopped using those. But as soon as vaping came into play, and they didn't look or smell or taste anything like regular cigarettes, they went towards vaping. I often get asked, what age is too young to start talking to kids about vaping? And the answer is that it's never too early, because we even have data about middle school students who are vaping. So just about 15% of middle school students report that they had ever tried vaping. And if you think about the age of middle school students, it's extremely alarming that at 11, 12 years old, they're not even a teenager, and they're putting nicotine and other harmful substances into their bodies. Another thing is I work a lot with schools, and I talk to a lot about parents about the things they are seeing and hearing with vaping. And prior to COVID, when school was a little bit more normal, we actually heard that elementary school students were getting their hands on vaping products. Some of the ways that this was happening was that basically when you're young, you want to be like the big kids. So elementary school students would see the middle school students vaping or talking about vaping on the school bus or at the school bus stop, and then they'd want to try it. So the middle school and high school kids might bring their vaping products on the bus and leave them there so that they don't have to bring them into school. And then the elementary schoolers use the bus after them in some towns. And so they would pick up the products that were left on the seats or on the ground. And it can be alarming because even if I don't smoke it, nicotine can be absorbed through the skin. So it's just really important to start the conversation early about preventing youth from starting these products. So enough from data, let's really talk about what vaping is. So all vapes and e-cigarettes look different, but operate the same. So the E in e-cigarette stands for electronic. That electronic piece is the battery. The battery of a vape supplies the power to the device. The power goes to an atomizer. An atomizer is where the e-liquid of a vape, which is stored in the cartridge, is heated up hot enough to be an aerosol. The aerosol is inhaled and exhaled through the mouthpiece. And that aerosol is really the cloud of smoke that you see when it's inhaled and exhaled, that white cloud. So you just heard me say that it's inhaling and exhaling aerosol, which sounds like a really fancy word, but it really just means that it's a chemicalized cloud. And it's really important that we call it an aerosol, because usually when I give this presentation in person, I'll ask the audience, raise your hand if you have heard, either yourself, you think that vaping is just water vapor, or you've heard kids say it's just water vapor. And usually every single hand in the room goes up. But it's not water vapor, it is an aerosol, which is much more dangerous. And you've also heard me say, just in the first couple minutes of this presentation, that I've said both e-cigarettes and vaping, and they are in fact the same thing. These products just have hundreds of different names to make our jobs more difficult. So they're often called e-cigarettes, vape pens, tanks, mods. In the public health world, we call them electronic nicotine delivery systems, a really long fancy word, or we abbreviate it to ENDS. So sometimes you'll see that terminology used in doctor's offices or on the news. But really, when you're talking to youth, you want to make sure you use their language. They often refer to it simply as vaping, or they call it by the brand name. So Juul is an extremely popular vape brand. So you might ask your child if they smoke or if they use a vape, and they might say no. But if you ask them, well, do you eat Juul? And they'll say yes, because they don't realize that they're synonyms, simply because the tobacco and vaping industry have coined so many names to hide the fact that it really is still smoking. So like I mentioned, no vape looks like the other, but they do operate the same. So we've got a couple different kinds of products. Disposable e-cigarettes are just like the name suggests. You buy them every time you run out, and you just throw them away when they do run out. So they're really sleek and light. They basically look like, they started off looking like a regular cigarette, and then they took on this rainbow bright packaging to look really nothing like a traditional cigarette. I've actually had one just like this rainbow one here when I'm giving a presentation. I bring vapes that have been confiscated from schools for parents to see. And in particular, this rainbow one I actually have, and a parent thought it was my marker that I took out to take down some notes for her. But it is in fact a vape. So those usually have about 300 to 400 puffs. And can be as cheap as $5. The most expensive that I've seen them is around $10. So they're really inexpensive. There's also vape pens. Vape pens have an open cartridge usually, so a user can add in the substance themselves, the e-liquid. So today we're talking about tobacco and nicotine. So we're going to be focusing on e-liquid that is liquidated tobacco and nicotine. But it is true that vape pens and almost any other vape device can be altered to smoke other substances. So another popular way that vape pens are used is with liquid marijuana. Tank systems are similar to vape pens, where the user adds in the liquid they'd like to smoke, so they can choose the flavor, the nicotine strength, the amount. But these tank systems have a bigger cartridge and a bigger battery, so they produce a larger cloud of smoke. So that's when you really see essentially an entire cloud come out. It's probably a tank system. And lastly, we have the rechargeable vapes. So these are a one-time purchase. You buy the device itself. It's around $40. The Juul is a great example of a rechargeable because it's so popular among kids. They buy the device itself, and then right here on the end is what's called a pod. Those come preloaded with liquid. They stick right onto the end. Those are what the person has to buy over and over to continue to vape. But the device itself, once the battery runs out, They plug it in just like you would plug in your phone or your laptop once it runs out of battery, and plug it into an outlet in the wall, or even you can plug it into a computer because it has the same outlet for charging as a USB port to recharge it. So in particular, kids in schools were getting away with charging their Juuls in a laptop in class, because if you look at the Juul, it resembles a flash drive. So there was many stories of kids plugging their Juul right into the side of their laptop, and teachers thought, oh great, they're taking notes. They brought their flash drive today to save their notes and do their projects, but in fact, they were charging their vaping device. And the tobacco industry and the vaping industry always is coming up with new products. So this is just a couple of products that have started to come onto the market as almost like a new generation of tobacco and vaping devices. In the top left here, you have Eon Smoke and Puff Bar. So since Juul, one of the reasons Juul was so popular among kids was because its sleek design, how you can get away with charging it into a computer. It was easy to hide, it was super light, and had the bright, delicious flavoring. Well, not delicious, but kids thought it was delicious flavoring. But what we started to see right before schools closed in March, pre-COVID, is that kids started to like disposable vapes as opposed to rechargeable vapes because they were so much more cheaply priced and they were less of an investment. Meaning kids wanted to vape in school, and most schools I work with will say, yep, kids don't even call it the bathroom anymore, they call it the vape room. So what happened is kids said, I want to bring my vape to school. I don't want to bring my Juul because if I get caught, that's cost me $40 or $50, and that's a lot of money to lose. But these disposable vapes can be $5 or $8, and I'm okay with losing $5 or $8 if I get caught. So these disposable brands, Eon Smoke and Puff Bar, said, we're going to make our device look just like the Juul, since that's what kids like, but it is disposable, so it's cheap and light, and kids can throw it away if they're worried about getting caught. We also started to see a new product in smokeless tobacco. So in this top right corner here, it's called Snus, S-N-U-S, and there's a couple different brands here. But what you see, so up on the top row are the containers they come in, and the bottom row are these pouches. That's the product itself. It's a pouch of tobacco that goes inside of the mouth, just like chewing tobacco, except the whole thing dissolves in the mouth. Whereas with chewing tobacco, you'd have to spit it out. So with these products here, kids were doing this in school and being able to get away with it since it was so easy to hide and it just dissolved right into their mouth. And the reason they wanted this was because of the nicotine buzz that they got, which they thought, kids often think that nicotine helps them calm down and do better, when in fact it quite does the opposite, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. So again, just other types of vapes you see here. This one sort of has a teardrop shape. You can see the way they're marketed with peach cream and cinnamon stick. That is in fact an advertisement for vape juice, even though it looks like a delicious dessert. But I actually want to talk about this one in the middle here called Cloudy. This is something that is definitely coming onto our radar because they are being advertised as quote unquote wellness vapes, which no vape is good for your wellness. So it's really important to think about that, the way that's advertised. And if you look at this advertisement, you see things listed like melatonin, chamomile, and lavender. Those are three fantastic things to have in your tea or in your essential oil, but not things that should be inhaled into the lungs. So this is a brand that put those things into a vape so that people can inhale it, and they advertise it as a sleeping aid. And they don't even call it a vape, even though it is. They call it a personal diffuser. So the way the tobacco and vaping industries advertise and market their products is exactly the reason kids have become addicted, and adults too. So something like this with the Cloudy Sleep Vape will trick not only kids, but adults too. So it's really important that we keep our eye out for those products. So like I mentioned, vaping is an aerosol, not water. There's still a lot of research to be done since vaping is still relatively new to the market, but here's what we know so far about what is in the aerosol of vapes. We know it has nicotine, which is more just as addictive as cocaine, alcohol, heroin. It's an extremely addictive substance. Cancer-causing chemicals, and since most of these vapes are made out of metal, some of the metal actually gets heated up and inhaled. So things like nickel, tin, and lead have been found in these aerosol clouds as well. And then the chemical diacetyl, which was traditionally used in microwave popcorn to give it that delicious, buttery, oily flavor, was actually banned from microwave popcorn due to the fact that when popcorn factory workers were inhaling it, they were getting really sick. So because it's so oily, even though it was making people sick in the popcorn factories, vape companies like it because it helps with their e-liquid oils, and they're using it in those products. Other chemicals, so here's a list of some of those chemicals, and here's where you can find them. Propylene glycol is found in both vapes and antifreeze. So it's great for your car, but definitely not your lungs. Acetone may sound familiar if you're someone who uses nail polish. It's a really strong, great nail polish remover. And if you're not familiar with nail polish, acetone's so strong that if you spill even the smallest drop of acetone nail polish remover on your table, it will strip the paint off right away and ruin your furniture. Yet it's being inhaled into the lungs. Ethylbenzene is found in paints and pesticides. Formaldehyde is found in embalming. Rubidium makes a really great 4th of July show, but it's not safe for your lungs. And then of course, nicotine, which is in cigarettes, which we did teach kids was bad for us. So a little bit more about nicotine. A lot of kids say they vape to help them with stress relief. But we know that when youth are exposed to nicotine, they have the list of all of these things here in the red box. Lower impulse control, depression and mood disorders, giant mood swings, and especially where kids most of the year and most of the week are in school, nicotine disrupts their ability to learn properly. So they have trouble concentrating, they can't think about what they're doing as well. They also have trouble with sleep. And we know that a good night's sleep is really important when it comes to going to work and school the next day. They have weight and appetite changes, and it also can prime the brain for future drug addiction. So think about a middle school student, someone who's 11 or 12 years old, and they are going ahead and starting to vape that young. So as they get older, research shows that they're going to find vaping's not enough for them. So maybe they turn to traditional cigarettes. And when traditional cigarettes aren't enough for them, who knows what drug they might turn to next. So we actually know that kids who start vaping at a young age are 4 times more likely than kids who don't vape to turn to traditional regular cigarettes. So things to look for are really just to see if your kid's vaping. You want to look for things that are completely out of character in these symptoms here. When we talk about vaping, just to put it in comparison as to how much nicotine it can be in a product, 1 Juul pod is really small. A Juul pod is the preloaded liquid substance in a Juul vape that goes on the end. As far as size reference, they're about the size of your thumbnail. So it's a really small pod, but it has the nicotine equivalent of an entire pack of cigarettes. 1 Juul pod is the nicotine equivalent of 20 cigarettes. And to put that into perspective for you, not just as much as size, but what we often hear is that the average for a young Juul vapor is that they smoke 1 Juul pod a day. So that someone as young as 12 or even an early teenager or a young adult getting the nicotine equivalent of a pack-a-day smoker. So other ways to tell that youth are vaping. Vaping is not like traditional cigarettes when it comes to the smell. So if you walked into a room where somebody smoked a cigarette or a couple of cigarettes before they came into the room, you would know. Cigarettes have a very distinct smell. But if you walked into a room and somebody vaped before they came into that room, you might think, someone has on good perfume today, or they're chewing on some nice flavored gum. Because with vaping, it's often flavored. There's a sweet scent that comes from the device or the product, unlike cigarettes. So you smell something sweet, but you're not exactly sure where it's coming from. So when I work with schools, I tell a teacher, if a student asks to go to the bathroom and they take a little bit longer than they should, and when they come back, you can get a whiff of something sweet or minty or chocolatey, any flavor, honestly, it might be a sign that they left the room to vape. As far as we're all being stuck at home in quarantine, if you walk into your child's bedroom or a room that they're sitting in, and it smells really sweet or it smells really good, but they weren't just putting on their perfume or they weren't using essential oils or room spray or anything like that, it might be a sign that they were vaping as well. Other things to look for are just unfamiliar products. You started to see in some of these pictures that vapes do not look like our regular cigarettes. So a great thing to do is the CDC, Center for Disease and Control, actually has a vape visual dictionary, which is a fantastic way to get used to what some of these products look like. A simple Google image search will also show you what they look like. Now that you're starting to see, if you see something like this on the right, this is a jewel pod. If you see that on the ground, now you might know, that might not be a flash drive, that might not be a USB. Maybe that's a vaping device. So just kind of be on your toes of what to look for. And then the signs of nicotine addiction. So nicotine addiction is really serious, and it can really cause someone to act completely out of character. So someone who's going to have such strong cravings to vape that they may have an emotional outburst when they can't. So things like vaping in places where they know they shouldn't. So I've given an example of schools. Maybe they're vaping on the job if they are a high school student with a part-time job, in their bedroom, right? All these places where they shouldn't vape. And if they can't vape, that emotional outburst. So if you're with your child having dinner and they ask to be excused and you say, oh, can you wait just a moment? Wait a second, wait till we finish. And they have this emotional outburst. It might be a sign that the reason they were asking to get up is because they need a nicotine hit. Trouble concentrating. So a lot of these are behavioral signs, but things to look for too as far as physical is if you have someone who's an athlete or someone who likes to work out a lot, and they're usually pretty fast and pretty fit, but all of a sudden they can't keep up in their workouts, it might be a sign that vaping's coming into play as well, since vaping really does impact the lungs' ability to breathe properly. So the good news is that you can help teens with vaping. We're going to talk a little bit about the end about specific quit vaping resources that are free to kids in Massachusetts. But one of the number one things you can do, since every teenager and every vaping addiction is different, is just make an appointment with their primary care physician to talk about help getting them the correct help to quit. Other things you can do: delay the urge to vape, deep breathing, water. A lot of people who try to quit, they can't shake the motion of bringing their hand up to their mouth. So things like toothpicks or gum or lollipops can really help with that physical motion. Doing things that take their mind off of vaping, adjusting routines. And something else that's great is role playing and avoiding situations that make it difficult to say no. We know that a lot of kids get their vapes from social sources or vape due to peer pressure. So practicing how to say no if a situation comes up and not going to places where people might be vaping. So talking with your kids about vaping can be a little bit intimidating because it's a really serious talk, but the important thing to do is to just have the conversation. not a lecture, not a serious talk where they're in trouble, but an open conversation. You have to be patient and ready to listen. And again, the earlier you start the conversation, the more likely you are to better prevent them. There's also no perfect time to talk. Often when I talk about when you should have the conversation, I've actually had a parent in a presentation raise their hand and say, well, I had the talk with my child when we were on a 4-hour road trip up north. I'm like, okay, if that works for you, if they couldn't get anywhere, you really had nothing else to talk about, that's fine. But also the cool thing about having a conversation in the car is that maybe you saw something, maybe you just passed by a vape store and you can use that as a way to start the conversation. Maybe you were sitting at a red light and a cloud emerges out of somebody's window. Then you can ask them, hey, do you know what that is? And what do people your age think about vaping? Starting with some open-ended questions are a really great way to talk. And it's really important that you're open and honest. It's okay if you don't have all the answers, but you can also put the blame on me. You can just start by sharing some facts. Like, I saw a presentation by this woman named Ashley, and she told me that the same ingredients that are in fireworks are in vapes sometimes. Did you know that? So just pick a way to have the conversation and roll with it. Another important thing is to know that the kids aren't to blame. We talked about how the tobacco and vaping industries made their products rainbow and brightly colored and tasting like any food you can imagine. And that was a tactic directly to addict kids. So youth are really a victim to the industry's tactics, so it's not their fault. Even though it might be really easy to get angry at them, it's important that we say, hey, the tobacco and vaping industries did this to you, but I'm here to help you and talk through it. Most importantly, it wouldn't be a presentation today if we didn't talk about COVID-19. And there certainly is a relationship between smoking and vaping and COVID-19. So this is a direct quote from Dr. Valkow with NIH. And she puts it really simply that since both vaping, smoking, and COVID-19, no matter what the substance is, since all of those impact the lungs, people are going to be at a more serious threat to an infection. So this information is coming straight from the Attorney General's office with a handout she did for information on the topic. But we know that people who smoke and vape are in a high risk category for COVID-19 because they may have a more serious infection. As soon as anything other than clean air is inhaled into our lungs, we can't fight off infections as good as we're supposed to. Your lungs have specific cells that line the lungs where their job is to fight off anything that's not supposed to be there. But tobacco, and specifically flavored tobacco, which most often vaping is, all of a sudden makes those cells not work as well. So the infection gets in and it can't be fought off as easily. So this might be the difference between someone who quarantines at home with an infection and someone who's in the ICU on life support with an infection. So again, it just really, smoking and vaping damages the immune system. We can't work as well to get healthier, but we also know that smoking and vaping increases the spread of COVID-19. So we talked about smokers and vapers often can't quit that motion of bringing their hand up to their mouth. Yet, one of the number one things to do to help prevent the spread of COVID-19 is not touching your hand to mouth. So that's one way that they might increase the spread. We also know that, especially youth, social sharing of vaping products is often used. So a kid will say, oh, you try my vape, it's a different flavor, and I'll try yours. So putting something in someone's mouth that doesn't belong to them can increase the spread. We also know that smokers and vapers often have a cough because their lungs aren't working as well. And so it's really common that smokers and vapers may mistake their cough for their regular cough and not a COVID-19 cough. So they will still continue to go out and do their grocery shopping and not get tested and seek the medical care and not quarantine because they think their cough is the one they've always had. So because of all of this, it's a really great and important time to talk to the people you know and love about making a quit attempts to protect them from COVID-19. And here is a real life picture from a school in the state right before COVID-19 shut down. And this just speaks to the fact that kids often refer to the bathroom as the vape room. They said, we want to vape, we don't want to get caught, so we'll just throw all of our stuff into this one stall here. But the question is, how did we get here? Seeing this toilet full of vaping products, how did we get to this point? And we've talked about it a little bit, but really just to bring it home. The tobacco and vaping industries made their products sweet flavored. They made them really cheap and easy to get. So there's actually over 8,000 flavors of vaping products. And we talked about how cheap they can be. So they can be $5, $10, and even if they're marketed as being $50, you can see in this top picture that there's almost always coupons to get these products cheaper and easy to get. So you could buy these products in sometimes grocery stores, convenience stores, gas stations, corner stores, you name it. So they're in stores that we often go into, and the more people are exposed to them, the more likely they are to buy them. But the good news is that in Massachusetts, we've taken action to fight those tactics. So at the end of November of 2019, we passed a law called an Act Modernizing Tobacco Control. This law takes all flavored vaping products off of the shelf of regular stores in Massachusetts. So anything flavored, like you can see here, sour dream, mango, lemonade, you name it. All flavored vaping products taken off of the shelf. That went into effect right away as soon as the law was signed. Another piece about this law is that 6 months after it was signed, so on June 1st, all menthol tobacco products were taken off of the shelf. So that's things like menthol cigarettes, mint chewing tobacco, or the snus we talked about, mint cigars, you name it. So there's no flavored tobacco for sale in a regular store in Massachusetts. So this is really great because now kids cannot go see them, and because we know when they see them, they're more likely to want to try them. They can't buy them, so nobody's being able to see these. There's a lot of other pieces with this law, but I'm not going to take your time today explaining them all. So I encourage you to visit mass.gov/new tobacco law to go more in depth learning about this, or you'll see my contact information at the end if you wanted to learn more as well. So I said that Massachusetts took all menthol tobacco away, but we're going to talk about why. What is so specific about menthol? And you can see here in this picture, these are some samples of menthol tobacco, and they're all green and blue, which reminds you of minty flavors, because that's exactly what menthol is. It's a cooling agent that uses menthol mint flavors. So really what we say with menthol is it's easier to start and harder to quit. Menthol might sound familiar to you if you use Icy Hot or BioFreeze, or you've sucked on a spearmint or a mint cough drop and you're sick. Think about those things and think about how all of a sudden your pain is numbed and how cooling it feels. So that's exactly what happens when menthol is put into tobacco products. That harsh burning flavor on the throat goes away because the menthol coats it and makes it numb and cool, which allows someone to inhale more, which makes a longer addiction and makes it harder to quit because their addiction is so much stronger. In addition to menthol being easier to start and harder to quit, menthol is also a huge racial justice issue, and I'm going to let this video explain that to you.
Imagine a just society where people are seen as more valuable than company profits. For decades, the tobacco and vaping companies have intentionally and continuously risked our health for their profit. They flavor menthol cigarettes to make them easier to start and harder to quit. They make menthol products cheaper in neighborhoods of color to get people hooked. They put more menthol ads and displays in Black and Latinx communities. And they target LGBTQ plus communities through ads with phrases like, "Take pride in your flavor." Massachusetts wants everyone to have a fair chance to thrive and be healthy. So starting June 1st, menthol and other flavored tobacco products will no longer be sold in Massachusetts stores, which will improve health in our communities. No menthol? No why. Visit nomentholnowhy.org for more information and tips to help quit tobacco for good.
So hopefully that video explained it to you. I actually give a whole separate presentation that focuses just on this topic, but I'm going to be really brief and finishing explaining it to you. The tobacco and vaping industries strategically and successfully made menthol tobacco a racial justice issue by putting advertisements like the ones you see here. These are real advertisements for menthol cigarettes. And you can see that all of these people are influencers and leaders in their community. Like, I would personally want to hang out with every single one of these people. They're having fun, they're dressed well, they're famous maybe. So they purposely put advertisements like these in Black and Latinx communities so that they would become more addicted, so that they could have a whole population that's addicted to their products their whole life. Not only did they advertise them more, but like the video told you, they were priced cheaper. So I see them more, I can get them at a pretty affordable price. Why not try them? I've also heard from multiple people who are Black and lived in Black communities say that a truck used to drive around and hand out free samples of menthol tobacco. And it only takes that many free samples to try them and like them and then make that become an addiction. And here's just a real quote from one of the tobacco giants, R.J. Reynolds. When he was asked about menthol tobacco, he was asked why he didn't smoke. And he said, well, I don't smoke that expletive. We just sell it, and we reserve the right to smoke for the young, the poor, the Black, and the stupid. So just a quote to prove that this was a really racist industry target that they were using. And you also heard the video mention LGBTQ community targeting. So this product snus that we talked about, they put the tins in rainbow. They said, take pride in your flavor. This was also done a couple decades ago with Virginia Slims. You can see that the products have changed, but the advertising hasn't. And you can even see with the Juul here, the Juul has skins, which you can almost use like a phone case. You can put on whatever you want to personalize it. And of course they had rainbow ones as well. So No Menthol, No Why is that video you just saw. This is our campaign to educate the public about this law that was implemented and why it was implemented. So you can just visit our website to learn more about the law, what was happened, and we've used real people in Massachusetts that have stories about menthol to share their information. So if you are somebody who has information or a story about menthol, you can go on and be featured. This picture here is a woman named Evelyn. I work really closely with her in Lawrence, and she has a video on there explaining how she is a Latinx woman living in Lawrence, and she was addicted to menthol tobacco, was diagnosed with cancer, beat cancer, and is now a tobacco advocate, a tobacco prevention advocate. So there's a couple stories on there you can watch or share your own. There's social media posts to spread the word. There's even virtual backgrounds for Zoom. If you're on Zoom all the time, you can use the virtual background to help start the conversation. And there's even press releases to learn more as well. Here's just some websites I recommend you can go to in this ever-changing world of public health. These are some trusted websites you can go to continue to learn. But the program that I work for, the tobacco program with DPH, we have our website here called getoutraged.org. So if you go here, you'll see a tab called Get the Facts. So this is all the 101 information we went over. There's tips, again, those tips for how to have the conversation with your children. There's a whole toolkit for schools, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It is available in Spanish, and then there's a whole tab with the resources to help youth quit, which I told you we'd talk about. So that's right here. So there's 2 free resources in the state of Massachusetts to help youth quit vaping. The first is called This Is Quitting. It's powered by the Truth Initiative. It's a free and confidential automated text program. So all kids do to enroll is they text this keyword to this phone number, and they're automatically enrolled in this program, which will send them texts automated to talk them through quitting vaping. That's a great program because we know there's a lot of kids who don't want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody verbally. But even though we do know that, there are kids who do want that verbal connection. So My Life, My Quit is the second program available in the state of Massachusetts. It has both texting and verbal available help over the phone. So all they do is they text this keyword to this phone number, or they call this phone number, and they're connected to a trained live coaching specialist on the other line who will help them quit vaping. And again, the best thing they can do is always talk to you, their parent or guardian, or their school nurse, their doctor, to get help as well. And here's just a card. This is an example of a resource that we give to doctors' offices, schools, community organizations to have available so that kids can discreetly pick up more information if they're interested in quitting. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions about the topics that we covered today, please feel free to reach out. I'm here to help you. If you are someone who works in a school, we have another video with specific resources that your school can implement. Or if you are someone who works in a community organization in public health, if you're a provider in any way, we also have a video with specific resources for you. So feel free to check those out. Thanks so much for watching today. Have a great day.